I guess I got involved in around maybe in 1974, I think, with the AES, beginning when I was kind of finishing my university degree, and found out about it through Floyd Toole, I guess. He'd given a lecture about loudspeakers in Ottawa around that time. I guess he was involved. And so I got to meet him and develop sort of a lot of relationships with a lot in the research area, because there wasn't too much in the studio business, CBC, etc., in the Ottawa area. And then we eventually moved to doing studio work in Toronto. Got to know some people, various designers, Neil Muncy and some other people, and studios from Nimbus 9. And there was studios in Ottawa that Floyd Toole had been involved with in designing loudspeakers. And we felt, loudspeakers needed some help, and we felt we could do a better job of what had been currently, because the loudspeakers we thought weren't very good at the time. Sort of, we were talking in the early 80s. There was a lot of activity in studios, a lot of music, but there was a whole lot of improvement could be made, and so kind of set out to make things better, figure out what wasn't good and how we could make it good. And so it's been a very interesting pursuit, career in the design of studios. And so we've been involved in the interior acoustics design of studios, and we felt that in the end you could improve the studio, but there was a limit to what you could do if the loudspeakers were bad. You just couldn't make things sound phenomenal unless the loudspeakers had to be improved. And so we kind of discovered that horn-based loudspeakers, which were the norm in recording studios at the time, could sound very harsh and had very colored sound, very irregular frequency response, which added a lot of peaks and dips at different frequencies, which sort of made a particular kind of sound. And aside from that, there was a lot of distortion in the loudspeakers, because horn loudspeakers typically make a lot of distortion. Although they play very loud and they're efficient, they have a lot of distortion. So we decided to try and eliminate horns. We first started with a loudspeaker that Floyd Toole had designed for a recording studio in Ottawa. And he had sort of, through research at the National Research Council, found components from horn-type manufacturers and put together a four-way system. But it used horns, and he had kind of developed a sort of what was at the time a primitive crossover system. So we started, I guess my background was partly in electronics as well as physics. So decided the first step was to design a better crossover, because the response of the loudspeaker could be improved, but at first it was really, we need to sort of do electronic equalization of this loudspeaker. What we did was something unique. We started equalizing the drivers individually instead of the whole loudspeaker, which was the norm then, and then applying a crossover to that. So that was very different. That was kind of like a major step forward, where you could make the loudspeaker, the curves combine acoustically rather than just sort of electronically, because if there was phase errors between the loudspeakers, the woofer and the low mid and the high mid and a tweeter, then you just couldn't equalize it properly. So we came up with an electronic circuit, and this was sort of the basis of our products. The very first product we made was on this loudspeaker in Ottawa. And then the next thing was, well, we got that sort of as good as possible, but then we decided that the horns, the concept of having horns in the loudspeaker was really the primary limitation. And there was a kind of a bonus that there was a lot of loudspeakers from Europe, drivers, individual drivers, which were coming out, being manufactured, which could actually play loud enough to be in a recording studio. And so that gave us the opportunity. So we sort of started selecting from all the world's manufacturers of loudspeakers, of which there were quite a few at the time, from Denmark and Belgium and France and other European countries. Pretty much only the bass stuff came from America, and all the mid and high frequencies came from Europe. So we took out the horns, and then we started getting a much better and better loudspeaker for recording studios. And so we started this, and I guess we got the opportunity to do this at a studio called Sounds Interchange, which is, I guess, now been through many iterations and operated by various groups. I guess now it's operated by Technicolor, and it's been through Labatt's and different owners, Dome. So this was with Les Bateman and other people there, Sid and Salim, who owned the studio at the time. So they sort of gave us a carte blanche, which was really the phenomenal break. That's what you need when you're young. You need to get in there, convince somebody that you can build a better mousetrap, And while you're young and you don't have any background or you don't have any sort of reputation, you sort of convince somebody who's got the means and the money to say, okay, well, I'm going to take a chance on you. And so it was really like a golden opportunity. We'd done some things before, but this was one of the biggest studios in Toronto, biggest studios in the country, and they gave us a chance. And so we really went to town and we started developing all elements of loudspeakers. And at that point, we sort of got better and better. But the loudspeakers were kind of limited. We just couldn't improve them. We were testing them at the National Research Council, and there was a limit to how good they could be. And we were really going for a flat frequency response and, very, very smooth and very good off-axis response, because that had turned out from a whole series of tests at the National Research Council to be the most natural sounding loudspeakers. So we were going for like high power, low distortion, but very natural sounding compared to what had been done in recording studios before. And there was a few companies around the world, but in Europe, there wasn't really anybody in North America that was doing this. I think we were pretty unique at the time. There was people from Britain and Finland who were doing it, and maybe KEF as well. From Britain, they sort of had a quick foray into studios. So we designed these loudspeakers. We were testing them in the Research Council, and we just couldn't make them better. So we decided that, I figured out that it was the frequency response of the crossover, when you add them all together, the electronics of the way the filters were designed, they didn't add up, and they didn't make so if you took an electrical sum of all the crossover outputs, you didn't get a flat frequency response. So the idea was, well, how can we fix that? So I worked for several years on trying to look at every kind of possible crossover and sort of developed a new crossover on which I got a patent, which allowed us to get a completely flat frequency response electronically from the crossover. And then we started applying that to the loudspeakers, and we were able to actually get frequency response plus or minus 1 decibel from the lowest frequency. The loudspeaker was designed to go up to 20,000 hertz, which was, I think, unheard of at the time. We actually made high-power 4-way loudspeakers with two 15-inch woofers, which had a frequency response plus or minus a dB. So it just made a sound quality which was kind of phenomenal. So we started with big loudspeakers because that's what we're interested in, and then eventually as smaller studios came in, then we started developing smaller speakers. And so we came up with a model which was really, really popular, which was a CF750. It was a much lower cost loudspeaker than the largest ones, but they sort of really hit like a storm, and I guess Peter Moore, who had been producing the Cowboy Junkies, really took on. He was working for Adcom, selling our products, and he sort of sold them all over the country. And we'd sold loudspeakers, as far as Japan and Disneyland and California, and so it was a very good, interesting thing. One of the most memorable experiences was actually once we designed these loudspeakers for Sounds Interchange, they then decided that they were going to do a major expansion of the studio. And they hired my wife, who's an architect who works with me, and myself to design the entire complex of studios that's on Adelaide Street. And they, again, had, I guess, lots and lots of money, and they decided they wanted to make the best studio possible. And so aside from the loudspeaker design, I guess had expertise in acoustics and recording studio design. So we were able to do some work there and got various people, including, I guess, Phil Giddings. This was he was doing all the electronic design and wiring design, system design, and we were doing the acoustics and loudspeaker design for the project. So we kind of worked together, and we designed what we thought was the absolute best sort of recording studios. They gave us enough money to design custom absorbers, so we looked at things that we're doing in Britain, BBC, all over the world, and we sort of said, okay, well, how do we make those? So we designed a whole series of sound absorption products, and we developed them, and we tested them at the National Research Council. We measured the absorption coefficients. We documented them. We made variable acoustics, things that could rotate triangles, and you could change the acoustics of a room very easily from almost no absorption to very high absorption. So we were able to put this in the studios. We had mobile ceilings, things that were moving in the ceiling to change the acoustics from live to dead. We had we'd sort of, been traveling a bit, been to different parts, southwest and east of the States. And so we'd seen what other studio designers were doing. So we kind of took elements of things that we thought we sort of semi-invented, or made a better concept of acoustics, plus stuff we'd seen, like individual areas where you might put a piano and the acoustics were different. And we sort of put that all together, and it was a really big project, and it was all the rooms are built in concrete, and they're floating, and they have floating floors, and the walls are built on concrete and top. And so it was kind of a really marvelous opportunity over a couple of years to come together with, okay, let's take your loudspeakers, which we really like, and let's now make, a whole entire complex with Foley and for film and for doing, music and bands, and it came out with a tremendous success. So I guess that was really kind of a golden opportunity, big highlight of my career. We designed with IMAX for the Rolling Stones movie. We designed, I think it was the only one at the time, and it may have been the only one ever. It was a recording studio that was certified to do both IMAX and THX at the same time. It actually had 2 sets of loudspeakers because the IMAX and THX arrangement, and everybody said it couldn't be done, and it's a very large theater, and so it was, we put in our largest loudspeakers, which we also sold in some studio in Jamaica, because there was no limit to how many 18-inch woofers you could have in a control room. But the idea is that we designed similar loudspeakers with our concepts to the ones with the IMAX ones. They were done out of Birmingham, and so we met with the people who designed the loudspeakers for all the IMAX cinemas across the world, and we said, okay, well, we'll take your concepts, but we'll apply our concepts to it to make it a higher quality sound in a control room environment. And then we added THX and IMAX all together. So that was kind of like the ultimate combination for this Rolling Stones movie. So I guess that was... So we've designed several things from the THX point of view, both control rooms that are THX certified for making the product, and also playback in cinemas. So we designed, I think, what at the time was, and maybe still is, the most highly sound-isolated cinemas from THX. I remember when the THX guys came to even certify the control room, there was IMAX. They said that was the only room, or it was the room that they had tested, because they always certify the rooms, that met every single one of their specifications, from reverb time to acoustics, frequency response, dispersion, even. So I guess we've had a lot of highlights from our good design work. We work hard at it, and we always try to do the best we can. So it's, I guess if I was to leave anything to anybody, is, study hard, work hard, and do the best you can, and hopefully you'll get some rewards for it.